welcome back to this week's episode of Fearless. And I have to say, I'm really excited about today's episode because it's not too often I get to say I have one of my dearest friends on with me. And today I have my dear friend, Pam Pryor.
Oh, I love it. Would you say that again?
That you're one of my dearest friends.
Yes, say it again and again. Oh, that's...
It's just not too often that you just get to...
I know.
Because normally we talk a couple times a week.
Yeah. Well, and I'm driving to church.
Yes.
Early in the morning.
We just go, can you have time to talk? I'll call you.
Baby crying in the background
because
sometimes.
I'm the millennial that likes to call and not text, and she's had to learn that.
Yes.
So Pam and I met back in 2016, and we just hit it off right away, and we've been dear, dear friends. And anytime I have questions, comments, or concerns about anything going on in politics, Washington, D.C., or the American church, I call Pam. So that's what we're going to talk about today, because Pam has spent her entire career, adult life, working inside politics in different realms, different campaigns. She was a chief of staff for J.C. Watt out of Oklahoma. And just like I said, many different campaigns that you've all heard of, and she's been very influential in many of them. And so when I said, she's like Miss DC, she knows everybody. You go into Washington, D.C. and you go out to eat, she's going to run into people she knows.
Oh, well, it's just a product of being that old. At some point, you know half the people in the world just by virtue of being on a planet.
But so many times when I'm on Fearless, I run things by Pam and I get her opinion. But I've also talked about all the time, my mentor said this to me, or my mentors. I said, well, why don't I just bring my mentor on the show? So Pam, welcome to Fearless.
I am so thrilled to be. I cannot tell you how much I've looked forward to this.
You might have just gotten the longest introduction of anybody.
Yay!
So, and actually, you know, it's funny because I'm just giving you a friend introduction. I probably didn't give you a very professional one.
Oh, that's okay.
And if I did actually Google you, can you believe it? I Googled you.
No,
you got a very long biography.
Is it okay?
Yeah,
does okay stuff come up?
It's a big resume.
Oh my goodness.
I
haven't Googled myself lately. I know we're supposed to do that, but I think it's
So what I want to discuss today is, of course, we are in some turbulent times that we're facing. We got this election coming up. But the impact of voting for a U.S. president, it goes far beyond the halls of the White House, far beyond the U.S. borders. It has a global impact. And what do we as Christians need to be thinking about the impact that we have when we go to the ballot box in November?
Jesus. How's that for simple?
Good start.
Yeah. It is such a complex time. And there is not one thing I can think of, Cissie, that doesn't need more Jesus, especially politics right now. It's mean. It's ugly. But this election, and we say this every year, this is the most consequential election of your life. We say it every year. And because I think until Jesus comes, they're going to get more intense and more intense. So they are the most important ones. What's on our mind as Christians? People are flawed. Candidates are flawed. I've never met a perfect one. The only perfect person that was ever on earth, they crucified. So I think we've got to look beyond just the people, but vote for the platform, for the group that expresses closest to our biblical values. It's not going to happen. I mean, there's not going to be somebody that aligns with every single thing that we want as believers.
Or ones that would protect our biblical values.
Correct.
The longest, I kind of say, because I think eventually one day, Democrats, Republicans, they'll all turn against the name of Jesus. The whole world's going to turn against the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
But who's going to protect them now in the time that we're in?
Yeah. And I think along that line too, not just the protecting, but sometimes God uses improbable people to do things. Sometimes God uses, he uses all things, right? Romans 8:28. You think about COVID. Without COVID, we really wouldn't have had the parental rights movement. We didn't know what was going on in the classroom. I think elections are the same way. And we often don't treat them the same way, though. You know, we give everything to the Lord. And I think we need to give our vote to the Lord, too. Really ask the Lord, how would you vote? Jesus is going in that voting booth with you. There's not one square inch of this planet that he is not sovereign over. He is sovereign over every ballot box, over every vote. And I think we need to take that seriously, really pray about it.
You worked at the State Department under Mike Pompeo.
I did. The deep State Department.
Yes, I remember visiting you one time because you were wondering if I wanted to come work up at the State Department. I realized this is a spiritually dark place. It's a very difficult place to work. But talk to us about those policies that you worked on there? Because I want to know what I want people to understand what the U.S. elections have, the impact it has globally. What's at stake for us here that affects those around the world?
One of the things I used to talk about, well, let me just say, in the last administration, one of the first things we did at the State Department was move the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was a promise that president made, and he kept it.
Well, a lot of presidents promised that,
my goodness.
Candidates, and never came through.
Well, I worked in Congress. We voted on it every 2 years. We'd have this vote, and it would always pass, and nothing ever happened. But that was one thing that we did. But I think one of the things I used to love to tell people is there were probably a collection of a minimum of 50 people working on international religious freedom. And the first year I was at State in 2017, Billy Graham Evangelical Association did a religious freedom summit in May. And it was just so gratifying to know that we were working on the same things. So that is one of the things that the State Department does. We actually, under our administration, we made it its own office. It used to be actually subsumed by another office called Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. We pulled it out of it and said, international religious freedom is so important, we want to do that on its own. So it's now its own office. Ambassador Sam Brownback served as the ambassador at large at that office. And that is really, that's just some of the most satisfying work that I've ever did.
You've had people come up with different religions tell you how important the religious freedom of America is, and why is that?
Yeah, well, whither America goes, the world goes. If people are apologizing all over the planet for America and saying, not that great, people kind of look at you crazy. I mean, there's no other country where people are literally killing themselves to get there. I mean, this is a great place. Flaws, wrinkles, warts, but it's because we are the shining city on the hill. And like in religious freedom, if we don't have it here, and Cissie, we are starting to see the chinks on the armor, people going after our domestic religious freedom. People in foreign countries, they pay attention to that. You know, I served as the acting assistant secretary for international organizations, which is so hilarious. This is a God joke because I don't even like the UN that much, but there I was. Well, I will tell you, when you were standing or sitting and that nameplate in front of you says United States of America, and you know that you were speaking on behalf of everybody, I mean, it choked me up. And I remember I was with some, pretty hardened State Department person, and I'm like, I'm pretty tender anyway, but I was like getting choked up, and it was because these people would come up. Now listen, I am like a nobody, but because I had that placard in front of me, people from foreign countries would come up and say, "Oh, we so admire what you're doing. We so love what the U.S. stands for." And it's really important. But if we don't stand for those things, other countries will not stand for it either. We literally set the mark. We set the pace on some of these issues for other countries, like the life issue.
I so advocate all the time. It's just not the president that we're voting for, and how critical it is for the appointees, for the secretaries, and who they're going to appoint. Because how many appointees does a president make? I mean, it's hundreds, right?
Thousands.
Thousands?
Yeah, it's like 3,000 to 4,000. I think we were on the low side. It can go all the way up to about 5,000.
But I often talk about of the
and by the way, that's worldwide too.
Yeah. I just think of the unsung heroes that walk those hallways, that are working on policy, they're working on legislation. Well, and I've been there where you were having little prayer groups right there in the State Department. Yes. You would have to hire or shut the door. And that was your mission field.
Yeah, which closed the door, pray quietly. It was crazy. But we went around. I remember, so the secretary's office, the seventh floor, the big important floor, sixth floor is also where there were a lot of assistant secretaries. But we went and anointed everything with oil. And we just prayed the Spirit of God into that place. And actually, in the last campaign is the first time I'd ever heard about intercessory prayer. And when somebody said, you need to have some intercessors around you, I was like, what do those do? Are those like cuckoo people or what? Well, I know.
Well, half the time I text you, you're in a prayer group.
That's right.
You are a prayer warrior.
My goodness.
But you'd have to be in that city that you work in.
It is the key to getting there. But this prayer group has been together since September of 16 all the way through now. So we've been together for 8 years. But they prayed fervently for all of us in the State Department. And there were many believers, many people. And I don't mean just like, oh, hi, I go to church. I mean fully devoted followers of Jesus.
Well, even your boss, Secretary Pompeo, I mean, I heard him countless times just say how he knew every day when he went to work, his job was beyond his ability. And that's one smart man. He was number one cadet at West Point.
He used to say about the president, he said, Donald Trump is no Sunday school teacher, but he sure likes to hire them. Because Mike and Susan actually taught fifth grade Sunday school in their church.
And he said that prepared him for what was to come. But he just said his job was beyond him and he needed God. He was fully dependent on God. And that's what. So I just encourage people to remember this. It's who they are going to appoint that are going to govern over us, who's going to make decisions over our education, over the religious freedom. Religious freedom is so big. It's not talked about enough, but it's the bedrock of this nation.
Cissie, can I tell you one story about international religious freedom? Not Christ followers. These were Yazidis. Yazidis are of denomination of Muslims. I thought only Baptists and Presbyterians and Lutherans had different kinds of denominations, but oh no, a bunch of different denominations of Muslims. But anyway, these Yazidis were just so persecuted. It was a genocide. And we actually did a genocide proclamation for them. This Yazidi girl who had been held captive, sexually and physically abused, and she came in the office and, it's like, why would you do this? Why would you help us? And I kind of look around the room and there was a couple of career people there and I said, because we love Jesus. She said, we've heard of him. And it's not like you pull out your track all the time and, go through the 4 spiritual laws. But I'm telling you, there's something different. And there is that sweet aroma of the Lord when you have people who love him. And there's an attraction there. And they were like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then, Andrew Brunson, but you go next.
No, I want you to go into that because you did, y'all helped with bringing Andrew Brunson home, who's been in prison.
Under Pompeo.
Who's been a guest here on Fearless before.
Oh, has he? Mm-hmm. Good. Well, by the way, we didn't do prisoner swaps. We just were like, no, we're coming to get our Americans. And no, you don't get anything returned. You shouldn't have had them in the first place. But we did 2 ministerials, first time ever. And by the way, we did a lot of first. The very first ministerial. So that meant that all the Secretary of States of other countries came. We had 40 ministers and then a bunch of countries that sent deputy ministers to talk about religious freedom twice. So in 18, we wanted Andrew Brunson home. He had been in now for 2 years and change and in a Turkish prison. And I remember his daughter was introducing him and she was pretty hard-boiled. And I said, Jacqueline, what's the hardest part of not having your dad? And she said, well, we got married, but I really wanted a church wedding. That was before we go on. So she goes on stage. I introduce her and she gets to that part and she's just sobbing. And she said, I wanted my dad to walk me down the aisle, but my dad is in a Turkish prison. Well, she's crying. And so I just start clapping and everybody stands up and claps for him. We got through that. The next day, Erdogan released Andrew Brunson to house arrest. House arrest, still not free. Vice President Pence speaks that day. He looks right in the camera, just like this. And he said, President Erdogan, not good enough, not good enough. Andrew Brunson needs to come home. So anyway, cheers, claps. The conference goes on. By the way, later that year, President Trump and the UN Secretary General did the first ever International Religious Freedom Summit at UNGA, which is United Nations General Assembly. We did so many firsts. Anyway, so I say to Jacqueline, I'd love to be at Andrews when your dad comes home, thinking, maybe we'd go through the administration, maybe the next administration, thinking we were going to win the second term. I thought, well, maybe, who knows when it'll be. Literally that October. And I will never forget, it choked me up thinking about it, so I'll try not to embellish, but I remember watching his feet touch American soil and thinking, we got him back. We got him back. And his family was there and they all rushed together. I think I don't know. Obviously, nobody knows what heaven's going to be like, but I've thought that's like that reunion. Just it was such joy. And the Brunsons are still dear friends. And you know what? You know where they'd love to go? They'd love to go back to Turkey
and serve the Lord.
Right. I keep going, not yet, Andrew, not yet. But anyway, yeah, that was one of the most fun, glorious, victorious things I got to do.
One of the good days at work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and I was also in a motorcade with Suburbans, and he had lots of guards around him because, they're terrorist cells. Oh, my goodness. You cannot have an iced tea on the seat because they are like, boom, boom. They are like within inches of each other, 3 black Suburbans. So there I was. Anyway.
Sounds like me with my iced tea that went flying in my car today.
About that
was just like
anyway,
my day.
It was great fun.
Penny Nance, who's a common friend, we actually I met Penny the same day I met you, of Concerned Women of America, says, when sex is on the ballot, it always wins.
Yep.
And as women, we're always told our vote matters, all about these sexual issues that are on the ballot. Why? Why is it that always wins? Because that is going to be a big thing when it comes this November.
It is.
When the left is using reproductive rights. That is what they are going to win this election with, or that's where they're putting all their eggs in one basket. Yeah,
it always cracks me up when Republicans say, well, let's not make abortion an issue. Doesn't matter what the side. Now, and I happen to be a Republican. I was in a Republican administration. They're going to throw it at us. They have already, ever since the overturning of Roe. They've been throwing this and scaring people to death. But yeah, Penny does say when sex is on the ballot, sex always wins. And, I don't see a lot of Asherah poles up all over, but it's biblical, right? There were sex goddesses. There were temple prostitutes, Now, the oldest profession is gardening, not prostitution, but the second oldest profession. So there's just always been this proclivity of man to work around the Lord's beautiful design for men and women and think that, he doesn't want us to have fun or whatever. Wrong. God's way is always better and pure and beautiful. But Penny will tell you it is a fight. And now, it's gay marriage, it's transgenders, it's, you recall after the last in
20 children's rights, which are parental rights.
In 2017, they had that horrible women's march with those ugly little hats on and some of the nastiest things. I have a friend, she's not even a believer, and this woman had a protest sign with this horrible word on it. And she said to her, and she was holding her like 3 or 4-year-old girl by the hand. And my friend Mary says, you're doing that in front of your daughter? And just expletives came out of her mouth, and I just think these are demons. This is not, as women, we have the ability to be strong and beautiful and just have that deep peace. There was none of that displayed. So yeah, they fight for it. They think that, they're always saying
that's our identity.
Yeah, or they're always saying, well, get out of our bedrooms. Actually, we're the ones that want people out of our bedrooms.
They're opening people into their bedrooms.
Right. No,
open the doors wide open.
Shut that door.
When we talk about working in DC, that is it's called the Devil's Town. That is a rough place to work. It's a dog eats dog. How you have survived all these years, or by the grace of God. But I've always say that's your mission field, and you have been a light. I love the story. You're working on a campaign, and you're kind of known as the good Christian lady,
the church girl,
and they put this ultra liberal with you, who was a writer. Y'all became
friends.
The dearest friends.
And I've introduced her to you.
And you have...
She loves you too. We're not going to say her name just because we haven't asked her, but yes.
But you love her. But I've watched that over and over. You've had young people who've started out as your interns before. Yeah. And I just want that as encouragement for people who are listening. No matter where God calls us into some dark places. You can look at Daniel and where he was taken, and Joseph, and how you live a life that's faithful to the Lord. No matter where he calls you, he wants you to be a light for him. And working in the Devil's Town, that's for sure. But how over your career, I think of young people that want to go work in DC today, or Christians, it's like, why would you do that now? But how have you seen that change over the last 30 years, where it used to be people would go eat with one another? It didn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. you would have disagreements on the floor maybe, but then you got along afterwards.
Yeah.
Do you see that at all anymore with some of your friends? Have you lost friends in the political sphere?
Yeah. Yes to everything. I think, and former Speaker Newt Gingrich would agree with us, when the balance of power changed in 1995 and the Republicans took control of the House for the first time in 40 years, up until then, it was almost Stockholm syndrome. It was such an imbalance of power that people did get along. When it's razor thin margins, I think that's what happens. I just think it's part of those.
Became a threat to them.
Yes. This person that you talked about, my friend, the ultra Democrat, the feminist, said to me one time, Pam, you and your friends will always be nicer to me than my friends will ever be to you. And she says the left is mean because the extreme left that has really no light. And I'm talking about the really dark parts. It's just mean. It's just demonic. We're not fighting against Democrats. And that's what I tell my Republican friends all the time. We may be competing against them in election, but this is not. This is about fighting the Prince of Darkness right now, who wants to steal our children, to mutilate them, to kill babies in the womb. Well, guess who's insatiable about blood? The evil one. And that's, to go back to the Old Testament, it's Moloch, right? Child sacrifice. So this is not Republican Democrat.
When you look at how that's changed over the years, what's your encouragement to young people coming to work, and how do you keep a joy and a light working in such a difficult place? Well,
kind of the way I started this interview, it's all about Jesus. And Cissie, if you don't have prayer, if you're not in the Word every day, and by the way, I don't care if you're in D.C. or, delivering groceries, working at a counter in a retail store, in the ministry, you have to keep close. And you have to have good friends around you. I think about sometimes when we're talking, it's like, I need my Cissie fix, because I know that you come from a point of biblical groundedness. You are grounded biblically. And to be in DC, that's even more important. You got to be in a small group. When I was working on the Hill for Congressman J.C. Watts, he did a Hill Bible study. There's several, all kinds of ministry on the Hill. Never enough, but there's a real Bible study, not just the one where they drink coffee and, share their life stories. But I remember one time flippantly saying to him, well, how come there's a Bible study for you and not for me? And into my life walked Peggy McCracken with Christian Embassy, which was a ministry of Campus Crusade. It literally changed my life. Sometime when we talk about our testimonies and our life stories, but it was the first time since college. I'd gone to a Christian college, but first time since college, and that had been like, at that point, 25, 30 years, that I really did group intense Bible study again. Life-changing. And I've kept that habit. And when we were at the State Department, I made sure that we had a prayer group there, not just outsiders, but even some of us internally. We all knew who each other were when somebody needed prayer. We are still meeting. Ambassadors, assistant secretaries, we're still meeting. But I don't care if you're 22 and right out of college, or you're 62 and going to be appointed an ambassador. You need Jesus. You cannot go into DC alone, and you need fellow believers. You've got to have that accountability group, because the general sin of everything is pride, right? But DC is like the biggest, look at me, mommy, and jostling and getting in the right pictures and working for the right member.
Well, you and I have talked about that. Sometimes you and I have shared a common struggle of not feeling valued enough, or not being, chosen for a job or something, not feeling something you deserve, because in that, it is, you might take out a friend just so you can get above them, to get the job.
Yes.
A lot of backstabbing up there.
Yeah. And I always tell everybody, there's that great colloquialism I heard from a Black pastor that, I wish I could say it like he did. Man's rejection is God's protection. And it is. But I have a favorite book called...
Hold on. Man's rejection is God's protection.
Yes.
That's what he said.
I have a favorite book that's when people are big and God is small, because it's a people are big place, right? Adulation, getting in the right place, working in the White House. Cissie, my story. I really wanted to. I did faith outreach in 16. I thought I should have been in a faith-based office. But God knew exactly what he was doing. And I still, when I think about it, there's still a little hurt there because it wasn't where I wanted to be. I mean, I can't imagine that Joseph went, yippee, I've been sold into slavery. Oh, I'm so glad my brothers tossed me in a pit. But then you do see the hand of God. You turn around and you look at the beautiful tapestry, and I know that's where I was supposed to be.
And God led you to where the least place you thought you would go. You're working for a church. You went from politics in D.C. to a church.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say a church. It's a huge church.
It is a wonderful
church. You work at
church.
Cornerstone Chapel of Pastor Gary Hamrick, who's been a guest here. He was just a guest previous episode here on Fearless.
He's wonderful.
That was a huge transition for you.
Yeah.
Something you just kept saying it was temporarily. It's temporarily. You didn't put this, like the stamp seal of approval on it.
January 20th of 2021, like every other appointee, I was asked to leave the office by 11:55 a.m.
And as you're walking out of the office, when you're in the State Department or government buildings, the president's portrait will be hanging.
Oh, yeah.
And Vice President,
they're all taken down.
By 11:59, all in the trash.
Yes.
And isn't that has something to say about man and the creation and the world that we create can quickly come tumbling down. That nothing is eternal of this world except for our soul.
Except that our names are written on his hand. And that's the thing I have to remind myself all the time. My name doesn't have to be written on a certificate that says, which I have and I cherished, I, Donald Trump, appoint you to be blah, 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 blah. But this is the most important thing. But yeah, it was crazy. I walked out and,
your job's done.
Yeah, it was, and no fanfare. And it was COVID. So there was no party. There was no and I knew I had some good friends. There were some wonderful people that are, career people. There are some wonderful ones, but there was no goodbye party. There was nothing. So I go home and, like the first month, I bought a new car.
I do remember that.
You remember because I had this 20-some-year-old car. But there was nothing. And so I was going to a church that never really reopened after COVID. It started taking a little bit of a left turn, and I was so grieved. I remember on Sunday mornings walking around just crying. Anybody that's ever lost a church or looked for it's just so painful. And it's so funny, sis, because I can trust God to do everything. Give me power to speak to other diplomats, even the Russian ambassador who was just not a nice person. But I would do all that. But here it came to finding a new church. And I thought, well, I guess I'm on my own. I don't know why I didn't think God couldn't help me do that, But my friends who are with me this week, the Normans, they said, well, we're going to go to Cornerstone Chapel. I said, that's nice. That's 45 minutes from my house. Fine. Thank you. And they said, this is the same preacher I talked about before with man's rejection. He said, if you drive, you'll thrive. I said, Richard, where'd you get that? He goes, from our preacher that said, well, okay, fine. So I drove. And the first Sunday I went, they were singing the song, Walking Around These Walls. I thought by now they'd fall, but I'll see him do it again. I've seen him move the mountains. I just am sobbing. And it felt so good. Well, I never went home. I never went, now I'm driving back and forth. And the church got involved in Loudoun County, which was ground zero.
Which really quick, I want to say God took you there where the least you expected and really far away from your home.
And far away. And by the way, God knew the price of gasoline would go up too.
But
wonder what he was thinking.
God has still allowed you to use the gifts he's given you and to do what you love, even inside the church.
Yes. And who knew, except my dear Heavenly Father, who always wants the best for us, knew that I needed a pastor that was also interested in politics. He's a truth teller. He speaks out. He does an election sermon every 4 years. He valued my political experience. He knew I didn't have a theological degree. And it was through the Loudoun County stuff. I remember saying Mike Ferris, who was started so many things, but he's on our church board. He was the Alliance Defending Freedom at the time. And I called him and I said, hey, Mike, do you think Cornerstone needs help with their comms? Because I'm unemployed and I might as well volunteer. And he goes, well, we're sure not doing their comms, but I'll see. So he talked to Gary, and that was like in April, May. In June, I get this call from Gary Hamrick. I remember I was cleaning out my study. After an hour and a half, I literally say to him, Pastor, are you interviewing me for a job? Because if so, the answer is yes. And I went, where did that come from? Oh my gosh, I don't want to work at a church. And he goes, well, as a matter of fact, we are. Can you come in for an interview? Well, August 17th was my first day of 2017 or 2021. And I've been there for almost 3 straight years. I love it. Don't tell Pastor Hamrick, but I would like do this for free. Don't tell him that, though.
You better not say that, because then the Lord's going to call you right back into Washington, D.C.
I know. I don't like the church that much. So it's kind of just okay.
Yeah, you better be careful what you say.
I know.
I do want to talk about, before we close, and we've talked about this with Gary before, is the church came to a time where they felt the urgency to open up school following 2020 and all the chaos that followed. And that's a huge undertaking. I mean, for all of you that work there, I'm sure you figured out later, wow, didn't expect that to come. Why was it such an urgent time to start a school? I mean, I don't want that job.
Again, our church is, first off, by the way, our address is Battlefield Parkway.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
God has such a great sense of humor. 650 Battlefield Parkway. And it is a battlefield. And like I said, our church is literally in the crosshairs of the parental rights movement. It was in Loudoun County, where there was a boy that decided he wanted to wear girls' clothing and ended up raping 2 different girls at 2 different schools in the girls' bathroom. We had parents that were arrested. We had teachers. A dear young man who spoke out against the school went to the school board and said, I can't call 9-year-old Billy Susie or 6-year-old Susie Tom. He goes, I believe that God fearfully and wonderfully made us the way we are. And I remember hearing Gary say, not in public at the time, but he just said, later he did, that if one of his attendees could be that outspoken at a school board meeting, it was time the church got involved. And he said it was really because Tanner, this dear PE teacher. Anyway, it goes on, and there's a great story about how he found it. It's a beautiful campus in Middleburg.
He shared the story with us, how he found it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story. So go back and listen to that Fearless podcast for Gary Hamrick. But I think for us, the real essence of it was, as believers, we're sometimes called to do rescue missions, not just of Andrew Brunson in a Turkish prison, sometimes our own children in the public schools who have gone so secular and godless. And so Gary said, we're on a rescue mission. And we started with 550 kids. It's the largest opening of a Christian school worldwide ever on day one. And it's been a ride. On my favorite class, Miss Stuber's kindergarten class last year. Oh my gosh. They're like
shout out to the kindergarten class.
Oh, it was so, but they're first graders now. So I guess I'll have to join that.
When I think of parents now, they're just having these conversations that we've never had before when it comes to our education.
Yeah.
It, even for me, do I homeschool? What? I can't even believe those words would come out of my mouth. And when I first had kids, I didn't even want them in a Christian school. I wanted them in a public school.
Right.
Be a light. That's how I grew up.
Salt and light. Be salt and light.
Now it's only a Christian school. And now
right.
I think eventually, and I'm not saying Cornerstone, y'all have solid leadership. I think because we're seeing the church in America shift and change and not know truth because they're not studying God's word, that's going to affect our Christian schools to where maybe even 10 years from now, Christian schools aren't even going to be an option. So, us parents are having conversations we've never had before, trying to figure out what is best for our child. And what you just said it, y'all were on a rescue mission for those children. And what a refuge for parents to give that kind of a solution for them in that area. So before we close, how do we inspire when we look at children? You're talking about school children that you've been working with.
Yeah.
how do we teach them how to honor our politicians, and how to respect those in authority when we kind of struggle with some of the stands that they take? So for an example, a commercial came on of a politician that I will not endorse and do not agree with anything. And my son came in and the commercial was on. He goes, boo, boo, boo. And I said, Austin, why would you say that? And because I've always taught him, that we have to respect those in authority, even if we disagree. Because one time at the dinner table, he said something negative about the president. And I knew he had never heard that from me, because I will not talk like that. Now, I'll say with things I disagree, I'll be teaching them what we believe as Christians, what God teaches about life and about how he created us in his image. But he'll never hear me disrespect. So we've had these conversations before. So sometimes I'm like, where'd you hear that? And he'll say, somebody at school told him that. So the other day when he was booing, I'm like, you can't boo something if you don't understand it. And, but you know what he said? He did understand it. He goes, well, they do this and this and this. I'm like,
oh no.
Okay. He's a pretty
so
smart
precocious.
cookie.
Yeah, he is.
Like after Afghanistan, he goes, why would they give all those weapons to the enemy? I don't know. That's a very good question. But I'm very careful. Back to the point, I'm very careful what I say in front of my kids. Of course, I'm very political. I love these issues, but I want to teach them to respect. What's your encouragement to parents as we go into that, this stage, these next few weeks and months?
And they're going to be awful, right? There's going to be commercials. I remember I live in the state of Virginia. There's literally an election every November because we're an off year and then we have off years. But this is going to sound repetitive, but again, if you're in the Word, you do read that. Honor those. I mean, good heavens. Jesus talked about giving to Caesar what was his. Caesar and his empire, who he knew was ultimately going to kill him. And yet, even in front of Pilate, he was so respectful. It's just amazing. But I think it's understanding that and having open conversations with your kids too. The reason we disagree with this group of people is because these are the things that we adhere to.
Yeah. And I think back to what does the Bible say? What does God teach us about that?
And it's what you said. They say this, but we say this, and your kids are going to go to other kids' houses where they don't maybe have as many parental controls. So you've got to do that a lot. But I really think, first off, I admire your not saying anything bad about a leader, because I'm not sure I did that wrong. Anyway, especially in politics. I mean, now I will tell you this. I remember when my Congressman J.C. Watts was running, and they really wanted him to do negative ads, and that was not him. And I disagreed. It was one of the times I really disagreed with the general consultant on his team. And, we've just let stuff, it's like there's this way or this way, but Jesus is the one of the third way. Jesus is the man of the third way. I do think there's better ways for us to do politics. I do think we can be kinder, but it's with truth. We've talked a lot about love and truth, Cissie, over the years in our conversations. Truth without love is brutal, but love without truth is a lie. It's just, it's not real. So I think we have to be real with our kids, but, I choke on those words, but I have to remind myself, I pray for our current president. I pray for his health. I pray for his family. I make myself do that. And it's interesting because the more you do that, there is a softening. I want this current president to do well. If I love my country.
Yeah, if he does well, we do well.
Yes. Well, that's scriptural. If the king loves the Lord then so all will go well with you and you will be at peace. But I kind of like that Austin didn't like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, because I watched that. That was in August when we had just left.
And he just didn't get it. He was glued to his TV.
It was awful.
He's the one that he's got his little army tanks all over the house, and he just didn't understand why would they give it to our enemies. But Pam, I wanted you here on today's podcast because I want people to understand and know the impact that this election will have from somebody that's worked in all different halls of DC.
Yeah.
from the Hill to the State Department, Indecide campaigns. I want them to know the impact that our elections will have, that it's not just, a popularity contest of who you like better or who's got better ads or who's got the bigger celebrities. This is
who's
serious.
Cuter. People do that. They vote on who's nicer looking.
Well, they might have a hard time with this one in this election. But I want them to know that this has such an impact and that we have an obligation as Americans, but as Christians. I look at it as you love your neighbor. You pick by voting people from local office to our state offices to our presidential election, that's a way that we love our neighbor. Who's going to make those decisions, who are going to govern over us and make decisions over our children and our schools and education and all those appointees. But I also wanted people to know in this podcast that God will use you as a light wherever he goes if you're willing. And that's what you've been. Just as you're talking and you're sharing, you're just full of joy and smile. And I know what you've been through. I know the places you work. Yeah. I've walked through some of those halls and seen you be betrayed by friends and people who all want the better job and the next opportunity, the next best thing. And they'll hurt anybody in their path. But you have served the Lord faithfully. And I want that to be an encouragement to listeners is God has you, wherever you're listening, when you're in a car and you got a job or a child is struggling or you don't know financial issues, God's going to use you in a mighty way. You go where he's called you to be obedient and you serve him with joy. We have to, as Christians, we got to have joy. Oh, I'm so tired of...
It's a source of our strength, right? The joy of the Lord
it's not a Debbie Downer day. As Christians, how's your day? Oh, it's fine. No, it's a great day.
Yes.
So you have done that. And you've been that example to me.
Thank you. I've been so blessed and privileged, though, too. I sometimes think about, my folks are Italian. They were the youngest of 10 and 8. They were both born here, but their parents and some of their sisters and brothers were born in Italy. Not educated. My dad, 8th grade. My mom did get a high school degree. But I remember one time sitting in the Oval Office thinking, only in America. These aren't patronage jobs. These are jobs, when you entrust your life to the Lord, it will be an adventure. It's not always safe. It's not always fun, but it's so satisfying just to be at peace with him. So yeah, it's been great. And who knew that I would someday get to meet Cissie Graham Lynch and just consider her my that daughter I never had. So it's been such a joy.
You have been. It was an unexpected blessing that day that I met you.
And the stories we could tell about that day, but that's for another podcast.
Yes. But Pam, thank you. Thank you for being somebody I can always call with my questions, comments, or concerns regarding all things political or American church, the things we see problems with. We think if they could just take our advice, if we get paid for our advice, we could fix a lot of problems.
And I still want to be like one of the ghost producers and writers on your Fearless podcast.
So many times you help me with my questions or stuff like that. So thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Fearless. Next month in October, I'm going to do a special series on what is on the ballot that's coming up in November on the election, because there are a lot of concerns as a mom and as a wife and raising family that I have. So how do we look at these different issues that we'll be voting for from a biblical perspective? Once again, thank you for joining me in another episode of Fearless. If there's any episodes you need to get caught up on, I encourage you to go to CissieGrahamLynch.com.